Jack.
Levi.
The book club from hell.
We're ready to get pozzed.
We are ready to get pozzed.
Yeah, we've been learning about how to
for
take hot pos loads from
hot viral loads.
What do they call
Down at the
them?
local glory
They
hole.
call them detectable men with the detectable viral load of HIV.
I want to roll the dice and just go to a hot sex party, and with maybe one stealther in there. You know, like you could have like a stealther party where there's one person in the party who's a stealther, and you know, it's like who's gonna get pozzed tonight.
Yeah, and you all make a blood pact or a cum pact never to take any antiretroviral medication. Just get completely cleaned up by it.
Blood pact. Yeah. So we are today. We are reading The Eroticising of HIV, an academic paper by. I'm going to butcher his name.
Jaime.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm pretty sure he's Spanish. Jaime García-Iglesias.
And basically, at a level, it's a social research paper on the eroticisation of HIV infection, specifically in the gay male community. I'm not entirely sure it happens in any other community, but this paper is specifically about the gay male community.
Yeah. You missed the subtitle of the book, though, which is really good. It's Eroticising HIV, Viral Fantasies.
Yeah.
He talks about the internet a lot in this.
Yeah. So before we jump into the episode, just make sure you give us 5 stars on Spotify or whichever platform you're on. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe on your podcasting platform. We've got a Patreon as well, if you want to check that out to support us. We've also got a Discord.
Big shout out to the paying Patreon subscribers.
Yeah, big shout out.
Big shout out to them.
Thanks. Shout out to the Discord. And obviously leave comments or whatever and give us a thumbs up, all the good stuff. Anything else when you're getting at the top?
Big shout out to my novel called Tower, which you can find on Amazon. Big shout out to the one I'm currently writing, which is shaping up to be a novel about having sex with an airport. It's
Is it
breaking
going to
new
be an HIV
boundaries
positive airport?
in terms of what you can or can't have sex with.
So yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah, so the author Jaime works he's at the moment, or at least at the time of writing this work, which was published in 2022. He was at the Centre for Biomedicine, Self and Society at the University of Edinburgh. Edinburgh, where he's the Mildred Baxter Postdoctoral Fellow. He specialises in the intersections of sexuality, internet, and health. I think he's a sociologist. This book's also a part of a larger series on the development of healthcare, its effects on society. I think they have a particular concern about surveillance. That didn't really come up in this book, which is kind of funny considering how much it goes into the internet and its impact on bug chasing. But anyway, also the effect of technology on healthcare, the concept of health. If the other books in the series are like this one, they'll be interesting, but kind of brought down a little bit by the word salad, like the post-structuralist word salad. And it's a bit too long. This work, I really liked it, but it really could be 40 pages rather than 100.
Yeah. So the concept of the overall series sounds interesting. Definitely very, what would you say? Yeah.
It's very social sciences.
So I was going to say academic, but that wasn't quite right. No, it's social science.
Yeah.
Very social science academy.
So this author loves using the terms. He loves saying things are being mobilized. He loves describing things as porous or fluid. At some points, he actually does just start talking about deterritorialization or reterritorialization or coding. So he has drunk deeply of the post-structuralist cup. So you got to know what you're getting in for. But despite that, which I do have a reasonably high tolerance for that sort of thing. although in this case it got in the way of the most interesting part of this work, which was all of the interviews he had with people who were either bug chasers or had some experience with bug chasing or new bug chasers, had been into it in the past. That was the really interesting bit. The continuous restating of someone's answer, but in the author's own words with a lot of post-structuralist word salad, was kind of annoying. Like, I've got some examples written down that I can use, but what would often happen is someone would be explaining some aspect of their life that was being influenced by bug chasing, and that was good, that was interesting. And then the author would then just dump, 400 words on you, just rephrasing, but in a much less clear way, what the person just told him.
Yeah. And with an overlay of whatever the his like intellectual framework is, referencing whoever, I don't know, some obscure academic who just like thinks the same as he does. So broadly speaking, the paper is structured like a few core sections that discuss big ideas that he's exploring, and it'll have sort of deeper dives into specific interviewees, sort of explain a little bit about their backstory, and then have a bunch of excerpts from their interviews together. Interviewees which you found on Twitter from all over the world. And we're roughly going to follow the high-level structure of the book. There's a few interesting key ideas we'll pull out and have a chat about, and some other things that would be interesting jumping off points to have a chat about. But yeah, the underlying research methodology was essentially he went and found a bunch of participants who self-identified, I suppose, as bug chasers, and had in-depth discussions and with them, and then edited that and provided excerpts. And I think the basic idea with that sort of social science methodology is you have a sort of framework or a lens through which you're understanding the social phenomena, and you conduct a bunch of interviews and any other research, but especially with the interviews, you basically are trying to see if the reported experiences, perspectives of the interviewees conflict with or demonstrate the framework that you're bringing to your analysis. And sometimes you even see things like this thematic analysis, which I think is kind of what he's done. It's like you're grouping key themes from the research or from the interviews. Importantly to note about that in this case is that they'll normally have a lot of these interviews and a lot of data from that. So there's editorial choices that the person writing the paper has to make. And he does talk about that. He leaves out some of the more explicit stuff from this particular paper, although in another paper he gets more into the violent or whatever stuff from his interviews. But yeah, he had to make editorial choices in which concepts he spoke about and which excerpts he used and so forth. Yeah.
We'll get on to our thoughts on this before we started reading in a bit, but I did like that with his methodology. So he said, he was looking on Twitter for these people and put out the call there, cruising common hashtags like hashtag BBBH or bareback brotherhood, hashtag BB, which I'm assuming is bareback, hashtag raw, hashtag pozzed, hashtag neg for pos. And by doing so, he found 21 people to participate in interviews, and those interviews then became this book. They're from all over the place. UK, US, Canada, Mexico, France, Germany, Australia, ages between 25 and 69. All the participants were gay men who have sex with men. Most participants were white. So he does acknowledge that this could skew the type of people who will be responding to interviews, because later on in this book he does talk about how the internet has a really significant role for a lot of these bug chasers, but then says, well, I found them over Twitter, so that's a pretty big confounding factor. He's very upfront about that though, which is good. He seems pretty aware of some of the limitations of this methodology.
Yeah, and he does note that even within that bias sampling methodology by which he went and found these people, he still found a very diverse range of life experiences within the constraints of being gay men, presumably, English-speaking gay men, I suppose, and a couple other things, but, different educational backgrounds, different socioeconomic contexts, different countries. So it seems to be, something that is more like something that occurs within the gay male community broadly, not within a specific country or a specific age group or anything like that. That was really interesting. I suppose there is a question of, I'd have two questions, and I'm sure he's thought about this, but what about trans men or trans women and the bug chasing in those groups? That'd be interesting, but I assume all of these cis.
He did actually note that. He noted that he looked around for it because among trans people, I think there's a higher rate of HIV infection than among cis people. And he said it just seems that bug chasing's a thing that cis gay guys do. So there are obviously straight people who have HIV. They don't seem to be into bug chasing as this a particular thing you're into that people form communities around and post about on Twitter. I tried having a look at Twitter at the bug chasing communities. I just got blasted with a lot of gay porn. I don't feel like I really learned anything new for this episode. I just saw a lot of assholes pumping cum out of them.
Nice.
It wasn't actually all that enlightening, but he says it's a thing that gay guys seem to do. Bug chasing is it hasn't made its way into other communities yet. The hot cultural export.
And there's an important thing to note, and I guess we'll have more discussion about this as we go through some of the ideas, but it's, at least in the context of this paper, it's specifically about HIV. It's not about other venereal diseases.
Oh shit, have we even said what bug chasing is?
Bug chasing is it's kind of in the title, right?
Yeah. The eroticization of HIV.
Yeah. So that, as we'll talk about later, that could be fantasy, just like getting off on it online or in your own mind, or it could be a reality. You could be out there actively trying to get infected with HIV. But it's not about other venereal diseases. You could imagine that there might be somebody out there trying to actively go and get gonorrhea for some reason, but it seems to be specifically gay men looking to get HIV, at least if you just read this paper. And that's really interesting. I suppose with that being said, that's the basics, but do you want to unpack his problem situation if there's anything
talk about how
to be said about
this
that
before going into it?
Yeah.
Because this book was actually more or less what I expected it to be. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I ended up having a pretty good time with it. I was expecting and hoping for more of the interviews. And while you definitely got quotes scattered around, I wanted more of them because they were the most interesting part of this. Perhaps in part because he's just selected the best quotes from hours and hours and hours of interviews, and the rest of the interviews aren't that interesting. But I was expecting more of those. Otherwise, though, it feels very social sciences. It delivers on what it promises. It's about 100 A4 pages talking about men who, in some way, get off to the thought of getting HIV. So, what more do you want? It's a good, honest social sciences paper about eroticizing HIV.
Yeah, it does not overpromise and underdeliver. It just delivers exactly what it promises. Yeah, I was my expectations. I didn't have huge expectations of it. I kind of don't like these sorts of papers, as long-time listeners will know. I really, we can talk more about that later. But I'm default, at least aesthetically, I suppose. I don't really like these sorts of papers. But that being said, I was interested in finding out more about it. And what I did think was good in terms of my expectations was that we managed to find a source that wasn't just like, well, Jack found a source that wasn't just like online communities. So even though it's got issues around, it's a bit, sort of fluffy, verbose language, and sure, we don't get the full transcript of all the interviews. I feel like, going to find just this topic in online communities would just be chaos and not.
Well, it's just tons of gay porn, because the first thing I tried was looking for it on Twitter, and it's just masses of gay porn. And I don't think we could do an entire episode talking about all of the gay porn we saw with like a little caption about like getting my man cunt pozzed.
So that was interesting. I thought that was a good thing that came up. And I kind of expected it to, as soon as I knew it was a social science, public health. And especially when I've read the preface or whatever about the series, and the idea behind the series being this exploration of technology and medicine and health, and in particular there's this one sentence where the person who wrote the preface or the foreword said, the some issue of like individualization and how it's like blah 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 blah. I was like, all right, this is going to be one of those papers, isn't it?
And look, it is. It's a bit less obnoxious than I thought it would be.
It is. They could have gone really.
They could have gone way hard. They could have gone full feminist glaciology.
Yeah. Well, they could have kind of had more of an axe to grind. Like position it as like, I don't know, some reaction against neoliberal heteronormative cultural hegemony or something like that, and the trauma of the 80s, which, not to say that there's not trauma there is, but they could have just fluffed it up so much.
And
if they wanted to.
I was expecting a bit more medical
practical
skepticism in it. There was a tiny bit talking about the need to. He used some Deleuzian terminology. I forget how exactly he phrased it, but more or less the need for gay men to reclaim HIV from medicine or medicalization. And it's like, okay, sure, you can view this in ways other than the medical, but
purely biomedical, purely this is a retrovirus, and it's, and to be fair, I'm open to those sorts of things. For example, in this case, HIV is a disease which overwhelmingly impacts a specific community more than it does. Maybe there's other communities as well that are in Australia, in I don't know, maybe in the West in general, but in Australia, like it's gay men that have HIV more over and above any other demographic, and it's a big thing for them culturally. And I can see there being an aspect of certain health issues where it's not like just looking at it through a biomedical lens is reductivist and doesn't take into account things around like like community, historical background, and like all that sort of stuff. So it's not to say that it's not relevant, but I think that this paper actually didn't overcook it.
It went to the line but didn't cross it. So like good on the author for that. He kept it on the side of enjoyable, and actually, I actually feel like I learned some things from it. He didn't jump the shark.
Yeah, and it was an interesting premise, which I guess we can start talking about. But so actually, I know we'll get to recommendation later, but I'm kind of glad that I read it.
I'd recommend it.
Anyways, the problem situation.
Context, you reckon?
Problem, situation, and context. Yeah. So I guess the broader context is that bug chasing seems to be a really modern phenomena. Like, obviously, this wasn't happening in the 80s. In fact, like a lot of gay men, gay men that I've met specifically, like became monogamous and that sort of thing in the 80s to avoid HIV/AIDS, because it just in the West at least
kills
it
you.
just
Like without antiretroviral treatment, the mortality rate is
just through the
close
roof.
to 100%.
It's like 100%. Yeah. Like you're going to die if you get HIV/AIDS and don't receive treatment. So so it decimated that community, and like any gay dude in Australia over the age of about 50 or 60 is going to have friends that they lost during the 80s, basically. So it's very strange that it's now the inverse of that has happened. And in particular, I guess another piece of the context is that it seems to be at least enabled, if not actually just made possible at all, by the internet, online communities, and social media.
And antiretroviral medication.
And antiretroviral.
Yeah, that turns HIV from effectively a death sentence into a chronic manageable condition. I think it's probably worth, for context, going a little bit into what is HIV/AIDS, because some people might not know. So HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, is, as one would expect from the name, a virus. And maybe there will be some people who don't quite know what a virus is. A virus, it's called a subcellular parasite. So, say in the human body or all animals, we're made up of cells. And what cells mostly do, with a few exceptions, is they've got a nucleus. Within the nucleus is DNA. That's basically the blueprint that tells the cell how to make proteins, how to regulate cellular processes using proteins or RNA, and so on. That's the blueprint, and it's sequestered away in the cell nucleus. What viruses in general will do is they'll infect a cell and then use the cell's machinery, that machinery which will make proteins for the cell so that the cell can perform whatever function it's supposed to perform, and use those to make more viruses and spit out more viruses, which is why they're parasitic. Like, they parasitize upon a cell to make more copies of themselves. What HIV is it's a particular type of virus called a retrovirus, and they're pretty cool. What they do is they get into the cell nucleus and will stick a copy of their genome, or say in the case of HIV, it's because it's an RNA virus, it'll reverse transcribe a segment of DNA, which is its genome, stick that into your genome, so into your DNA, so it's just in there now, and then start making copies of itself off that. And that, I think particularly that insight of how it will integrate into the host's genome is important, because in this book there are discussions of like HIV genealogies. So gay men while they cannot have children together, they can do things like integrate into this viral chain of people who have the same viral genome inserted into their DNA. So I thought that's a useful bit of context too. For one of the more interesting parts of this book, talking about that chain of infection, and you're trying to chase your viral genealogy back to Michel Foucault, because of course the author brought that up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, and I guess just as a quick aside, I always found viruses incredibly interesting because, they're not living by the standards of, like, they don't have their own cellular, like they don't have their own metabolisms and stuff. They're just like essentially a piece of genetic material with maybe some transport infrastructure, and so in order for the replication of, in this case, RNA to occur, like, they're completely dependent on like a host cell, host animal, to actually provide all of the metabolism and the cellular structures and replication. And so it's actually, in the case of HIV, it's actually the host's cell replication machinery, which is doing the replication of the HIV.
Yeah.
So
actually, an important thing too that I forgot to note in HIV is part of what makes it so devastating. There are a number of things that make it so difficult to at the moment we can treat it, but make it very difficult to vaccinate against, for example, and so difficult to clear a natural infection. Say if you're not taking antiretrovirals, is that the particular type of cell or the cells it infects. One of them is they're called CD4 positive T cells or helper T cells, and the problem with HIV targeting these cells is they're basically responsible for your adaptive immune system to function. So this is the part of your immune system that, upon encountering some sort of pathogen, will develop. It's called a memory of it. So you'll have populations of cells that are specific to a particular pathogen. They can just lie in wait until you encounter that again, and then those cell populations will proliferate, clear the infection, and then go back to sleep. So what HIV does is it just infects the cell type which makes that work and kills them. And that's why HIV can progress to AIDS, or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which is where you basically just don't have an adaptive immune system that functions properly anymore. And these people tend to die of weird infections, or infections that are very weird for an immunocompetent individual to die from.
Yeah, and it's a horrible way to die.
It's a horrible way to go.
It is. It's one, I would say, like, up there. It's definitely up there for ways to go. Because also there's so much diversity in like the actual specific infections that you might be getting and stuff. But anyways, it's a hell of a disease, and it's to this day still not cured. From like an absolute, like, we know how to kill the goddamn thing. So you can't clear the virus. There'll be a handful of people who get written up in a ton of papers. So yes, technically, people have cleared it. But if you, listener, if you get it, you're so unlikely to clear it. So what people can do now is you can take antiretroviral medications, and you take them. You know, they're medications you take regularly. They keep the disease. They keep your viral load so low that actually I don't think you can even transmit it. Again, it's medicine, so there's always going to be an edge case of, you can transmit it if you're on medication in this particular set of circumstances. But it's you effectively can't spread it. It's very, very hard to catch if you're on antiretrovirals. So it's turned it into a chronic, manageable condition. The problem is, as soon as you stop taking them, the virus is going to start coming back. Yeah. Importantly, on that note, from the opposite of the antiretrovirals is this thing that's called PrEP. So pre-exposure prophylaxis. I don't know how the mechanics of it work, but as far as I understand, you can take it, and if you happen to be exposed to it, if you take it within the 24 hours of being exposed or something, you can take it preemptively, and it'll give you protection against the infection. Yeah.
And the way it functions is it's the same, or it will use some of the same agents used to manage an established HIV infection. So like one of the really common ones is Truvada. It's a combination. I'm pretty sure Truvada, it's emtricitabine and tenofovir, and I think both of them are reverse transcriptase inhibitors. I think they're nucleotide or nucleoside analogs, but that's neither here nor there. But
diving into the biomechanics, into the mechanics of it, yeah. I think it's interesting.
It actually works in the same way as taking these agents when you've got HIV. What it does is it prevents the virus from being able to establish infection, because reverse transcriptase is basically one of the proteins that's really key in integrating the viral genome into your genome.
Yeah,
and so it just stops that working.
And
they're remarkable drugs.
Yeah, they're amazing. It's quite incredible that they were developed. There's Yeah, that's actually those drugs and the antiretroviral treatments for like ameliorating are actually like incredible achievements of biomedicine. Biotechnology is quite incredible.
Yeah, they're really good. You can also use them for Hep B too, so they're not just good for HIV.
Yeah, right. So one important thing to note, just a little background for anybody who doesn't really know, I guess, like kind of how HIV works, is it's it's in your blood and in your immune system. But the question is like, well, how does it get there? And generally speaking, you have to have like contact with some infected fluid or whatever. And importantly, like you can you can acquire it via blood, actual like blood, not just blood contact, but like. But blood, actually, like getting the blood into your blood. So, like, a compromised transfusion or like needle sharing if you're a IV drug user. But also, in the case of HIV/AIDS, I don't know if this applies to other viruses, but it's present in the mucosal like linings of your genitalia and your anus, and I think it's particularly active. Like it's like particularly active in one of those areas, and the actual acquisition of it can occur via sexual, like penetrative sexual contact, which is, I don't know if it can go through the mouth. Maybe it can. I wouldn't be surprised, but definitely like anal or vaginal penetrative sex is one of the ways that it happens, and so. In the West, at least. Oh, and you can also, if you're a mother with HIV, your fetus can also get infected, or your baby can also get infected. But I think, in particular, like with affecting the gay community, part of the actual physical mechanism is obviously like the penetrative sex, but part of the sort of like the cultural issue, the background is that in the 80s. It particularly hit gay men in the West, and that came with a bunch of social stigma, or like kind of this reaction from people who were religiously homophobic or whatever, and seeing this as like some sort of like the gay virus or whatever, like punishment against gays and all that sort of stuff. So there's like this really intense history behind, of all diseases, this disease is like a very culturally loaded one as well.
Yeah, and it hit that community again in the West harder because it like globally more straight people have it.
Yeah.
But it's for a few reasons. So yeah, like you said, you can transmit HIV in plenty of bodily fluids. You get a little bit of it in saliva, but very little. Like it's pretty hard to get it through saliva, through semen, vaginal secretions, breast milk.
Yeah, breast milk.
Part of the reason why... So, one of the reasons why it's just spread like crazy in the gay community is because in anal sex you get tearing and abrasions of the anal mucosa. Right. And so you get like semen with a good viral load into that. It will get into the bloodstream and transmit more readily than it would, say, in unprotected vaginal intercourse. So there's that, and then just like gay dudes on average have sex with more people, just like a greater number of other people, so there are just more chances for it to spread, more events.
Yeah, and I guess there's also a smaller subsection of the population, so probably like if you created a graph of like sexual partners, it'd be like not only more sexual partners but more tight, like it would be a denser.
They're going to be fewer steps between, like, basically any node on that graph.
Any two nodes, yeah. So, yeah, just the perfect combination of, I suppose, biological factors that intersected with the cultural phenomena of like a social network structure of gay men in the West to just create this hot mess. Yeah, so that's, I guess, part more specifically about this guy's problem situation is not just exploring like what is bug chasing, but he has, and we can unpack this further down the line, but he also has this question in the background around the relationship between fantasy and reality, the role of online communities and the internet in facilitating this. And this all arises out of his conversations with people who were bug chasers or are bug chasers.
Oh, but you don't use identity-based language, Levi, as we can talk about as well. A big issue. Yeah. So because this guy has been mainlining post-structuralism, he does not like to use terminology that implies some sort of fixed identity. Like within this context, he'll happily call people gay, not someone who partakes in gayness at this moment, but whatever. It's a social sciences article. So what is bug chasing? On the background of what Levi and I just said, why is there a group of people who look at HIV and go, you know what? I would like an arse full of hot, high viral load cum to get me posed. How HIV or bug chasing is defined in this piece is basically the eroticizing, a continuous process of HIV. And this can take plenty of forms. So some people who responded to his call on bug chasing Twitter for people to interview for an article are people who say in the past were into bug chasing and might have just like watched bug chasing porn, masturbated, had post-nut clarity and logged off, all the way up to people whose life basically outside of work is just trying to get HIV. And so the author's problem with some of the previous definitions of bug chasing, like say the one I was working with before reading this, of just people who go out and try to get HIV, is that there are plenty of people whose bug chasing fantasies only exist online, and it's just like a type of porn that gets them going and they watch it and that's it. Or people who you've got other ones. So there was one person who talked to Garcia-Iglesias and said he got HIV as a young man, wasn't aware of bug chasing, but found himself attracted to getting... He eventually learned the terminology, learned that these are called recharges, but kept going and having unprotected sex with other HIV positive men and enjoying that more than sex with negative men. So the definition of bug chasing as just eroticizing HIV it's a good one actually, because it does cover a lot of the behaviors that people who identify as bug chasers or people who enjoy bug chasing, however it may be expressed, it can encompass that.
Yeah, so I guess my only not gripe with it, I suppose, is just I was wondering whether or not there's a form of it where it's not eroticizing HIV or and whether or not there could be a kind of, what would you say, just somebody who's trying to get it without any erotic overtones, just as a matter of practical concerns.
Because there were a few examples he gave, because he did a literature review on the bug chasing literature and went through both definitions that various authors had given for bug chasing and also the reasons that those authors gave for the phenomenon of bug chasing. And yeah, some of those were non-erotic, as in, so there were some people who said, when I go out to the gay sauna and have sex with a bunch of guys, I'm worried about getting HIV, so I'm just going to get it, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. Which I think is just kind of dumb. Like, if you're taking PrEP, you're taking basically the same drugs you'd be taking if you've got HIV anyway. Like, it doesn't really change much.
Yeah, I tried to explain this to my partner, who is a straight cis female.
A non-bug chaser.
Woman, non-bug chasing, as far as I'm aware. And
Otherwise, Levi's got some serious problems.
Otherwise, I've got some serious fucking issues. Yeah, I've got bigger problems than like
Levi has
some of the
HIV.
other problems in my life. Sorry, I've been through it. Oh yeah, and I was trying to explain. Oh yeah, you know, there's people who are erotic. She's like, oh, so why do people do this? Oh, there's some people who get off on it for some reason. I don't know, like there's, but also there's people who it's almost like anxiety relief or I don't know. They've got some hang up around. Oh well, I don't want to worry about this. I'm just gonna. And she just goes, Levi, that makes absolutely no sense at all.
I think bug chasing is such a dude phenomenon because I don't find HIV to be sexually stimulating whatsoever. No. But I can kind of understand, okay, if someone looks at, you know, the taboo around it, the fear around it, that will be erotically charged in some way. Like, I feel I've got some insight, if I really squint, into how someone could get off on this, but I tried explaining bug chasing to my wife and she was like, that is so stupid. That is just inconceivably stupid.
Yeah.
There's no comprehension.
There's certain aspects of male sexuality.
Only the male spirit can understand bug chasing.
Yeah, I don't think that women will ever understand.
This is the No Girls Allowed club.
Yeah. No girls allowed. So,
but then there were other. So there was also like the sense of community was cited as, I guess, a non-erotic reason for bug chasing. So, like I said earlier, there was that sense of almost becoming a weird family. So you're becoming more genetically similar because you're now infected with HIV, which, so from a molecular genetic perspective, is actually not totally unreasonable. Like it's in some sense true. Your genomes are now slightly more similar if you've both got the HIV genome integrated into your genome, at least in the cells it's infected. So there's that. There's also there was some discussion of some people view it as courageous and masculine to get HIV and as cowardly and feminine not to try to avoid getting HIV. Yeah, which it's like you can apply that sort of
you want to talk about
driving on the right side of the road, or in Australia I only drive on the right side of the road because I'm a real man. Again, this level. Is all of these reasons are dude reasons.
Yeah,
where it's like when I squint, I'm like, I can kind of see that. But my litmus test as to if it's a dude reason or not is if I explained it to my wife, would she say that it's completely retarded, or would she get it? And I'm pretty sure none of these reasons would be compelling for her.
This is a whole new level of toxic masculinity for us. Literally, just get HIV. I don't know if that's a reasonable bar for masculinity. I feel like, if I was to say to my wife, I went around, I went and got myself infected today with like tuberculosis to prove that I'm a man to you, honey.
You have to be
okay. I think we're done here. So, and one of the other interesting reasons I found interesting. Again, it's kind of alien to me. I don't fully understand it, but it's the idea of identity, gay identity. You're not.
Yeah, I came across that one.
You're not fully gay. You know, there's gradations of being gay or a gay man. And maybe some people don't consider a man, some gay men maybe don't consider you 100% gay. You're a part of the in-group unless you've got HIV/AIDS. So it's part of getting your gay card.
Is that retroactive? Is it like the Christians who will, particularly some of the Renaissance Christians who really, really liked the sort of classical philosophers like Plato or Aristotle,
like Plato and stuff,
who aren't Christians and were born and died before Christ. And so they're like, oh, they would have been Christians, but unfortunately, they got born too soon. Is it like that with gay guys who lived and died before HIV? It's like, well, sorry, you're not a real gay guy because you missed out. You missed out on living after HIV and your ability to get it.
Yeah, no, I think it's just like, I don't know if it's an age thing. I think it's just an in-group signal. Yeah, it's like, are you really gay if you don't suck dick or something? It's like, you can have all these levels to it. Like, how gay are you? and what are the indicators of that?
Yeah, if you want to get to the top of the league tables, you need HIV.
Yeah, and this is number one. This is never had any sort of sexual contact with a woman, so you're a golden gay. You have sex with men, you have relationships with men, and you've got HIV/AIDS, or you've got HIV, you're pozzed. I guess that person or those people may have some sort of superiority complex about, like,
yeah, they're the
king of the
equivalent
gays.
People on our $60,000 a month Patreon tier.
Yeah. But I don't think this is a common thing amongst gay men.
I think this is 100% of gay people strongly and sincerely believe this.
At the very least, my guess is that only dudes who are pozzed have this opinion.
I would say it strongly correlates with people who are already positive and proud of it.
Yeah. So
I should also note, this is said a few times in this book, that within the gay community, bug chasing is pretty marginal. This is not something that most gay people are into.
Yeah, we probably should have said that at the beginning of the conversation or earlier in the conversation.
This is extremely widespread.
Really fringe. This is extremely fringe. Like, even within the Western gay community, which is extremely, I would say, accepting and open of sexual deviance. You can. There's a lot of sexual liberty in the gay community here in Australia. Even they're like, well,
going out and getting infected with HIV intentionally.
Yeah,
be like,
yeah.
Sure, you want to do that?
Yeah. So we've gone through, like, what is it? The eroticizing of HIV infection. Who is it? Largely gay men in the West. Essentially exclusively gay men, as far as we're aware. How do they do it? This is an interesting one. I suppose this is where the paper
really interesting.
This is where the paper starts, and we've spoken about why they do it, so the motivations and stuff. So how they do it is then a question of, okay, say we didn't have the internet and online communities. If this is such a rare sexual preference, or fetish, or whatever you want to call it, like, how would these people meet in the first, like, how would they connect? There just wouldn't be enough people near them to connect, and then and also how would they break the ice? You're sitting down having dinner, like, dinner party with your gay friends, and you're talking about, do you think the new liberals are, like, completely homophobic, or are they sufficiently, good for my bank account that I'll put up with them being homophobic or whatever? I don't know what gay dudes talk about over dinner parties, but presumably that's a bad context for,
could someone give me HIV?
Paul to put his hand up and be like, I really want to get infected with HIV. Do any of you guys have HIV and would be willing to give it to me? So probably because the taboo is so high, such a strong taboo. Yeah, it'd be hard to imagine this really being much of a phenomena without the internet and online communities and social media. I would hazard the guess that it is a necessary condition for this sort of cultural phenomenon to actually, like, become
for it to really nucleate and form a subculture with its own vocabulary and its own social forms and rituals. You probably need some sort of communication technology that allows the very small number of people distributed over the earth to get in contact with each other.
Yeah, and probably like anonymity as well to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think,
and I guess we can
I'll let you talk. I've got it.
We can get into the fantasy and reality part of it too, which is really interesting. Maybe we can get into that through gift giving, which is one of the, I don't know how important a piece of the puzzle it is, at least in the mythos of the online bug chasing community. The role of the gift giver is very important, although basically all of the people interviewed for this paper say that gift givers are extremely uncommon. So what's a gift giver? Basically, it's a guy who's HIV positive, who's got a detectable viral load, and is willing to give you HIV. A lot of at least the online fantasies, and presumably offline fantasies too, are based on or involve the role of the gift giver. You know, like a man who's going to come along and give you HIV and be linked to you forever. But as some of the people interviewed say, and including those who are really trying to get HIV and have been trying for a while, gift givers are hard to find. There's one guy, Scott. There's Scott, who's a 53-year-old Australian, and Clive, a 49-year-old Englishman. And these two guys are really trying to get HIV, and they've been trying for years and still haven't got it. And this is despite, say, going to the sauna weekly, like just really trying to get out and get infected with HIV, and they still haven't been able to, which probably says something of how hard it is to find someone who has HIV, has a detectable viral load, which means that they're not on antiretroviral medication, and is willing to give HIV to you. Which, yeah, I mean, when you consider all those constraints, it kind of makes sense that these people are hard to find.
So there's two things that are striking about that. Firstly, the fantasy stuff reminds me, it rings very similar to some of the female erotica or whatever, of finding like a strong, masculine, maybe a bad boy, maybe a werewolf, sweep you away, and I'm sure there's that sort of there's that sort of lit erotica in bug chasing, but with regards to gift givers, two things. In the first instance, I'm glad to hear that they're really hard to find. I'm glad that there's not a proliferation of gift givers, that actually, by the sounds of it, the vast majority of gay men who are HIV positive are doing the pro-social thing.
Yeah, being responsible
of not giving in to, or not facilitating the spread of a deadly disease that costs society so much resources in research and public health funding and stuff to suppress and control. And it's very dangerous not allowing that to spread in order to gratify somebody's sexual fantasies. I think that's very good. That's not a common thing. Gift giving isn't a common thing. But it's also a bit of a boogeyman as well, because there was I think it was in Canada. There's a guy who was an airline, as a pilot or staff on the airline.
Is this one of the early super spreaders of HIV? He was one
of the early super spreaders
that was spreading it around the world.
Yeah. And I believe he knew that he was HIV positive and did not inform his partners, and because he's flying all over the US and Canada, he spread it a bunch. Yeah, and just infected so many people. And I think outside of the gay community, that was like fodder for, like, again, more demonization of gay men, that sort of behavior. In that particular case, like, he basically turned himself into a weapon of mass destruction for biological warfare. Yeah, I think apparently he had very basically just malicious intent towards just revenge against the world or something, like resentment. But for the most part, it's cool that there aren't too many gift givers.
I should also say, though, because in the context of this paper, he limits himself to talking about people who consentingly give and get HIV. I don't look, I'm just not deep enough in the bug chasing community to be able to say for sure, but I think gift givers are doing so with the knowledge of the person receiving it. I think it's called stealthing when you give someone HIV without telling them.
Yeah, so stealthing.
I think that popped up in this article.
Yeah, I don't think you can qualify as a quote-unquote gift giver if the person doesn't consent to the gift they're being given, and it actively makes their life worse. It's not. Yeah, but they are. That's crazy that those people exist, but I'm sure there are those sorts of people. But anyways, so these bug chasers are having a hard time finding a donor. Actually, there is an interview online about an interview with a gift giver, and it's an interview between this gift giver and 3 other people who are, I think there's one gay dude and a couple of women and maybe a straight dude or something, and they're asking him questions, and the gift giver has a mask on to hide his identity, and it's they don't like him at all. Like instantly they're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? One of the interesting things that he said is like, well, this is what I'm doing it consensually, like this is what people want, I can help them with it. Like it's a closed community, they're coming into a part of the community that are already infected and stuff, and I don't know, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance and stuff, and it's an interesting one. See if you can find it online. Yeah, it's just on YouTube.
Yeah, but the mythological figure, not to say they don't exist, but they mostly exist as these mythological figures, but that figure of the gift giver, I think, can bring us nicely into the fantasy and reality aspect of this paper, which is one of the best parts of it, where he'll divide up the various ways in which bug chasers eroticize HIV as into fantasy and reality, and shows in his words, the fluid and porous boundary between these concepts. I should also just add that for this episode, I'm just going to be using Garcia-Iglesias' definition of bug chasing as the eroticization of HIV, rather than
for the context of this episode.
Rather than bringing in the non-erotic elements of it, which it sounds like they exist, but just for the purposes of simplicity in this episode, I'll put those to the side.
Yeah, for the rest of this episode.
Yeah, so how he defines real, in inverted commas, real versus fantastical, is basically the real in bug chasing is some action that has durable bodily consequences. So if you really, in a real sense, go and bug chase and get HIV, that has a durable physical consequence on your body. Like you've got HIV now, you have to take pills every day, or you get sick and die. So there's that, and this is as opposed to how he talks about the fantastical. So the fantasy of getting HIV, on one end of the spectrum, you'll have people who log on to bug chasing Twitter and jack off to bug chasing porn, and then go about their days, and bug chasing doesn't find its way into their offline lives at all. They actually just don't have any desire to get HIV. They just find the fantasy of bug chasing exciting. It's just their thing. And there are a bunch of people who were interviewed who are like that. And I think the interviews tended to be pretty short because the people just said, I just masturbate to it and that's it. Nothing else.
Yeah.
Other end of the spectrum, you've got, I guess, other end of the spectrum in a simple sense, you've got people who are just hitting the streets trying to get HIV. And then there's the more interesting combinations of fantasy and reality that he brings up. So, for example, there are people who will go out in the real world or offline and look for men who have HIV to have sex with, but the person seeking them out will be taking PrEP. So they, it's not 100%, but it may as well be. Like they basically can't get infected with HIV. It's pretty safe. So what they're doing is, in, I guess, inverted commas, reality, they're not going to get HIV. Like, they're not going to have these durable consequences of getting infected. But overlaid on that is the fantasy of, I'm having sex with a guy with HIV. He's ejaculating in me. He's got HIV viral particles in his cum. If the guy's being treated with antiretrovirals, actually, he probably has an undetectable viral load and he doesn't. But it's the fantasy gets them going. Then on the other side of that, you'll have... There was one guy, Marvin? He's a 69-year-old guy in London. For medical reasons that weren't going into, he hasn't had sex in years. And in offline life, he doesn't have any desire to get HIV. But online, he's got an avatar called Eric20, who just loves HIV, loves basically every sort of violent or degrading sexual act, like getting shat on, pissed on, beaten up, infected with HIV. And this guy spends hours a day as Eric20 engaging in these things. So, when an online persona is just taking up that much time in your day, to and call it so not real is... I don't know, the wheels begin to fall off that concept. Like, Marvin is occupying the subjectivity of Eric20 enough that it's it's fantastical, but there's also some reality to it because it's having an effect on him in his day-to-day life.
He has to actively imagine the stuff that he's writing about. It's interesting, isn't it? I guess to me, this part, it's an interesting idea. In part, this represents to me the role of taboo in sexuality. It's an interesting thing because it seems to me like. So I've got I've got friends who are sex workers, female and male sex workers, and I try not to ask them too many questions, so it's private or whatever. But when they share stories, which sex workers happen to have like pretty crazy stories,
a lot of good stories,
like just. Yeah, like really good stories, like just stuff that I think if you're not a sex worker, you're just not going to have some of these experiences. It would be so far out of your everyday experience if you're not a sex worker. And especially the type of people that they interact with, like at a really prominent people or famous people or like cashed up crazy people and stuff like that. And, also just like people who normal people. But all sorts of crazy stories from those conversations. And also there's a comedian in Melbourne who's a sex worker who a big part of her act is basically just around her experiences as a sex worker. It was really good. Can't remember her name, but shout out to her. Anyways, there are definitely big parts of human, how would I say that? It's very common to me, it seems, that for whatever reason, a taboo will attract a certain amount of people to basically fetishize the violation of that taboo, almost no matter what taboo it is. One of the craziest things I ever heard was gay Jewish men who like
I've heard about this, yeah.
Like fake, fake raped or whatever by like Nazi.
Yeah, by a guy in an SS uniform.
SS uniform. Like, if that's true, which I don't know if it is true or if it's just like some weird rumor, but I was like, okay, so
that wouldn't totally surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me. But it just went to show for me, like, okay, so the human mind can basically sexualize essentially anything.
Yeah, I think particularly the male mind is
the male mind
remarkable at that.
There's infinite creativity in the human mind, and sometimes that gets pointed towards sexualizing, fetishizing, obscene, or even sometimes just really mundane stuff like rubber or whatever. And yeah, so in this case, when I see the pure online bug chasers, kind of virtual bug chasers or cyber bug chasers who just like once that post-nut clarity hits, they just wrap it up and go about their lives, and there's no underlying intention to actually pursue
time to go to work.
fantasy. Time to go to work. I'm not actually going to do it. I don't want to get HIV. You know, I kind of just go, oh, you know, I don't really, you know, if I happen to know somebody who has that, I don't want to know. Keep it to yourself.
Yeah, keep it to yourself.
But,
it's your thing.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's your thing. Whatever. But it's just like an instance of, okay, again, human sexuality. People will find.
Yeah. They just had.
Get off on.
There's just something in their brain that was waiting for it, and probably through the internet, they came across it one day and were just activated. And their brain went, you know what? This is what I really, really want.
Yeah, and it's probably something to do with being dangerous, or the fact that it's you know, it's
I think subverting some sort of taboo.
Subverting a taboo, something around that.
Or some sort of boundary. Maybe I'm just too bataille-brained, but I think that is really central to the erotic.
Yeah, well, it seems like it. Like when you, like, what you have to go on is like any porn site or whatever, and there's just like a litany of, like, just a giant graph of different sexual taboos being broken in by actual, like, or like at least role playing those. And it's like, okay, so there's a huge market for it, huge amount of demand for taboo violation and or just weird stuff. I've never really figured out like what to think about that with human sexuality. It's just one of the stranger parts about people.
I just kind of take it as a given. It's just there whether you like it or not. This is just what this is what human sexuality does. Well, the erotic looks for something to transgress and just starts cooming on the basis of that.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's largely harmless. It's from just a personal, I suppose, development point of view, or like health, like having a healthy sexuality or whatever. It's probably better not to indulge those sorts of things for you. But if you are, I guess, just keeping it virtual is reasonably harmless. Maybe you're just harming yourself a little bit by, I don't know, like just desensitizing yourself and becoming weirder and weirder and weirder or whatever. But you know, it's not hurting other people. Yeah, like.
Yeah, I guess with the gigantic caveat that, okay, are the performers involved in...
Are they consenting?
This particular form of fetish content actually doing it because they want to? Or are they being coerced?
Yeah,
like,
are they consenting? And also...
Putting that to the side, even just assuming, okay, that's all fine. I think, look, the desensitization aspect is real, because part of the erotic, to at least some extent relying on transgression, means that you can get desensitized and it just becomes unerotic and you need something else. And this is not just me saying it. Like, I think it's pretty well described that if people get really into porn, or just a particular type of fetish porn, they're just going to keep going further and further and further down there. And it can have negative effects in your life. Like, if you can't get it up for an IRL person, that's like that is going to affect your life negatively, because it's not the same.
Yeah, I guess it's a new frontier. It's like, also just even if it doesn't manifest in something like that, like what are the cognitive impacts or something like that? Like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like spiritual impact or something on you. It's like, it's interesting. I don't necessarily have any answers, but it seems like there's a line past, like, that you can draw a line that you can draw in the sand and say, okay, well, below this line is fairly harmless. All right. And then I wonder what compels people to, start taking action on that fantasy? You know, like where does it become such a drive, such an important thing to experience that, okay, I'm actually going to try to meet somebody, or I'm going to go and engage in risky sex, or like ask for pos partners on Grindr or whatever. That kind of crossing the threshold event, you know?
Yeah, and where it becomes... So obviously this guy is an extreme, but there is one guy called Clive, whom I mentioned earlier, who was interviewed for this book. He's an offline bug chaser, but he does seem to have a humiliation fetish as well, because he'll post on social media like his face and his ID while he's getting paused. Which that's an extreme. But he talks his desire for bug chasing is constant, and he says he selects sexual partners basically just on HIV status, and he doesn't care nearly as much about how they look, how old they are, which is just anything really. It's if you've got HIV, Clive's interested, and that's I guess again it's if you index enough on this one element of your sex life, then I guess you'll start selecting people who are just on the basis of whether they have HIV or not.
Yeah.
So another one of these people, Scott, the 53-year-old Australian, also says he feels his lack of HIV. It's painfully. He really, really wants it. But I don't know what separates people like Scott and Clive from, say, someone like Marvin, who role plays a lot as Eric 20 on the in the online bug chasing world. And then from other people, I think there was a guy called Luke, who is a younger guy who says, yeah, I just masturbate to porn that has bug chasing in it, and that's it. So I don't know what makes someone cross over, because you'd assume there's some sort of link between these behaviors, like just being an online bug chase role play aficionado, and then, I don't know, further out on the spectrum, someone actually performing these acts in real life. Yeah, I'm not sure what pushes you along that. Like, if just engaging with the porn a lot is enough, like, I kind of feel like it wouldn't be. You'd need something else to.
Yeah, I have a sense that it wouldn't be enough. I'm sure it maybe contributes, but I guess I don't understand enough about the human mind. But at some point, the person's mind has the problem of I'm not HIV infected, and I want to be. I concretely want to be.
Yeah.
And versus like, I'm HIV infected, I don't want to be, but it's kind of hot if I thought about like, and like maybe getting it, I can kind of fantasize because I'd be with some masked guy and it's dangerous and risky or whatever. And we're transgressing this, this social taboo and whatever. But once there's that problem switch in the person's mind where it changes from, wouldn't it be, just, it's hot.
Yeah, this is hot. This is taboo breaking.
I want it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also think there's a thing that happens, or it must happen where did I read this? I read this somewhere, the distinction between a fetish and another word. I can't remember what the word was, but there was this line that this particular article distinguished between somebody who has is aroused by a particular thing, for the sake of it, like BDSM. Somebody might be aroused by it, a certain type of BDSM, can engage in that sort of sexual sexual encounters, but it's not the only way that they can get off, or it's not even common. It's like, oh yeah, that's fun to do every, the couple's like, oh yeah, every now and then we've got handcuffs or whatever, and it's fun to but the vast majority of the time they're having, fairly normal sex. That's not about the taboo transgression or the weird thing that they're doing. It's more just, about like being intimate with another person. And then there's a line or a distinction between that and, I think in this case, a fetish, which is like essentially the person can't get off unless this thing is taking place. So say, for example, like BDSM, it's like, oh no, like in order for me to get aroused or in order for me to, be satisfied, I like basically need to have, I don't know, like handcuffs or get spanked or whatever. And if you're in that situation, because your sexuality is just basically like anchored to this thing, you can't. I would imagine you kind of have no choice but to like actively select for partners who can help you with that.
Yeah. It's just like software compatibility.
Yeah,
you actually just can't get going unless the other person's willing to indulge in whatever you're into.
But I don't know. Yeah, there must be some very strange. I'm not an expert in it. I don't know, but like, there's something very strange about that. Like the transition. Presumably, a person who's got some fetish, BDSM or bug chasing, didn't always have it. It wasn't always a trait of their sexuality, but it transitioned. Like they developed and cultivated it over time, presumably.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about the internet is if you have these sort of subterranean virtual desires, you can there's a lot of scope for them to be activated if you just visit a porn site and look at the categories on offer. Like, but if there's anything waiting virtually in your brain, you're probably going to find a way to actualize it and activate it using the internet.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes not sometimes, there are plenty of taboos that I think are actually good, like restraining your behavior from doing something, damaging to yourself or others. And yeah, in the case of
maybe getting HIV is one of those things.
Yeah, like maybe, okay, actually this taboo is, that's not okay taboo. Anyways, you mentioned there about like the online stuff, and so why don't we jump into the big core idea, like more specifically the role of the internet and online communities. So this is biased by the fact that it's Twitter sampling, but I think that's fine.
Yeah, because he does say, so the author's very aware of that bias, and he brings it up quite a few times. But says even then, it does seem that the internet is important, is playing an important role in the bug chasing community. Like you said earlier, just given how few people are into bug chasing, how few people have getting infected with HIV as a virtual desire sitting within them, just waiting to be activated, and how presumably geographically widely distributed these people are. Without the internet, there's not that high a chance that two of these people are going to meet, let alone meet in a context where they're going to reveal their preference for bug chasing. So the internet, I think, is extremely important, even just in a communication sense, of allowing this sort of community to exist. So even just the concept of bug chasing, for that to have formed, you have to have enough people sharing the same sense of the erotic, meeting each other, probably in an anonymous space, sharing that and being able to develop the concept of bug chasing in the first place. I wonder how developed bug chasing as a concept was before the internet. I guess part of the problem too is that I think the first antiretrovirals came out in 96, or I'm pretty sure 96, but late 90s, let's say. At which point the internet was embryonic, but it was still, it was there. Certain weirdos were using it. It wasn't as widespread as it is now. So you've got the confounding variable too of the existence of treatment, so that HIV is no longer a death sentence, at least in the West, if you can get hold of antiretrovirals. Because I feel like that too, the advent of an effective treatment, is also important in bug chasing, because there's what was his name? Josh. So he's 51 years old. He's an epidemiologist from Chicago. So his youth was during the AIDS pandemic. And he, offline, has a lot of antipathy towards HIV because he had a lot of friends who died of HIV.
Yeah.
I think it was Josh who also said, like, the only man he's ever loved died of HIV. So he really dislikes the virus offline, but online, despite that, or maybe in a an erotic, transgressive way, because of that, online he finds bug chasing really sexually stimulating.
Yeah.
But so people like that demonstrate, I think that the advent of antiretrovirals is really important to sort of the stable existence of a bug chasing community, because if the people who are really into it just die, then it's pretty hard for that community to build if people just keep dropping dead. So there's people actually being able to stay alive. Two, people being able to engage with it without the disincentive of, well, if you get what you want, if you get what you are currently sexually desiring, you will die in the future. So it reduces the stakes a bit as well. So I think internet plus antiretrovirals are the two technological, if not enablers, but things that allow bug chasing as a phenomenon or a community to grow much more. Like from admittedly, like, an extremely low base. This is still very marginal, but grow much more than it would otherwise if you just die if you got HIV and there wasn't the internet to communicate with other people who were into this.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's those two enabling technologies. Like, it seems to me, just for the things the reasons we've already explained, it would have a hard time. The community would have a hard time nucleating in the first place, and then even if it did, the members would be dead pretty quickly. So and dead in just as we said before, a horrific way. I would, as I said before, I'm never really that surprised when I hear about a fetish or something like that these days, because people are creative. I would actually be surprised if somebody was fetishizing dying of AIDS.
Because it's slow as well. You see the end coming as your body falls apart. Yeah, it's really, really awful.
Yeah, it is. It is, and there's a whole bunch of trauma in the gay community around that. So it seems to me like it's innate. Bug chasing as a community, as a fetish, is enabled by, to me it seems like a precondition would be antiretrovirals, but then what enables it is online communication and anonymity and all that stuff. Yeah, so
I don't even know if antiretrovirals are a precondition, because I really think there probably would be some hardcore bug chasers who, if antiretrovirals didn't exist, or maybe in the 80s, they were just I find this just hot enough that I'm going to do it and I'm going to die.
As I said, I'm not going to make a...
Antiretrovirals reduce the price you pay for getting into bug chasing enough to bring in more, to onboard more people. The onboarding process is a lot more friendly with antiretrovirals.
I would be surprised, but I guess that's just an argument from incredulity. My own lack of imagination for just how just how crazy human sexuality can be. Okay, so maybe there has been people who have,
but I think human sexuality in basically everyone will respond to salience or signal in some way. Like, if something is really, 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 really important, then there's some chance that sexuality is going to latch onto that. And in extremis, you've got this disease that just kills you, and it's connected to sex because it's sexually transmitted, at least in a lot of cases. So with those things, with that mathematics of the erotic, I can see how a very small group of people would look at that fatal sexually transmitted disease and go, yeah, that is my thing. But the numbers speak for themselves. There just aren't that many people who are sufficiently turned on by HIV to get an untreated, to get it and just not treat it at all.
Yeah, and it is an interesting, just as an aside, we don't have to talk about it too much, but I just noted to myself that this and other taboos, other sexual fetishes that break taboos, but I think this one in particular is kind of counter evidence. It requires explanation from the evolutionary psychologist understanding of human sexuality, which I often find evolutionary. My main issue with evolutionary psychology is not that evolution doesn't play a role in human psychology. Of course it does. It's just they're very reductive about it. And in the case of like sexuality, they reduce it to, fertility and health signals, mainly, like from male to female attraction. And I was like, okay, well, maybe that's part of it. I always thought, yeah, sure, that's fairly obvious. But I've never really been that convinced. I'm like, I don't really feel like that's entirely explanatory.
I think it explains a lot, but
yeah,
I think just clearly there are a bunch of things which aren't involved in that. Because even, it's like a super common, I guess in some way you'd call it a taboo just because there are communities who still get upset about it. But like, especially going by how much porn there is based on it, it's just like interracial sex.
Yeah.
Is like, it really gets people, like plenty of people going. And like, what's the evolutionary description of that? Like, I'm sure people could magic something up, but to me that more feels like, you're operating on a background of, at least in the recent past, like people saying this is not okay. And some people today even saying, yeah, it's not okay. And that just adds some extra erotic sense to interracial sex. And I just don't feel like the evolutionary psychology argument totally describes that.
Yeah,
or the like just health signals part doesn't describe that.
Yeah, health signals part. So in particular with this one, it's like, okay, well, these guys are actively engaging in something that is harmful. One, they're gay men, so you already have the,
they're not reproducing.
Like, they're not trying to reproduce. And two, okay, well, you may say, oh yeah, well, it's like a misfiring or what, I don't know, something is like misdirected out of, something like that. You could make an argument like that, I suppose, but I'd still be pretty skeptical of that. But in this case, like, okay, I'm a gay man and I'm trying to do something that is actively harmful to my health.
Yeah.
And if it were not for this technology, antiretrovirals, this would be a death sentence. And because this is in the span of only a single generation, there's literally no space for evolution to have played any role in the emergence of this as a sexual fetish. There's zero. So I think just as a footnote, I know we've already kind of touched on it a fair bit, is to me this highlights there is obviously a very important role in human sexuality for creativity. Creativity is playing a really important role, and what that creativity is directed for, what problem it's trying to solve, I don't know. But to me, it's like, okay, well, the evolutionary argument just cannot apply in this case.
Yeah. Well, I think it's partially descriptive, but I wouldn't say it describes everything. It's incomplete.
It's reductive, yeah. So, any other things to say about online communities? I don't know. It's,
I don't know. There is more in this book on it, but I think we've covered the main points made. What I really want is I want more of the interviews. Those are the really, really cool bits of this.
Yeah. I've got on that note, we had a potential topic extra discussion, which is around research methodologies, interviews. Do you like this sort of research? Having read this paper in full, some of the other papers we read were pretty frivolous, whereas I don't feel as though this was frivolous. I thought it was like a fairly, respectable paper. But it's interesting. It's a health. It's related to health, but it's entirely qualitative, and there's no attempt to have statistical significance or do any sort of anything like that. It's just talking about the experience and perspectives and narratives of people who engage in this behavior. And I suppose the application of that to healthcare. What are your thoughts like, just coming from much more natural sciences background, biomedical background?
Yeah. I did kind of have to turn off STEM brain for this one, particularly as it gets closer to something that I have a tertiary education in. It's just something that I have a hard time stepping away from when they will discuss matters that I instinctively just think of as healthcare matters, like having HIV, but very explicitly doing so from a non-healthcare perspective. So healthcare for them it's only a category or a particular perspective from which you can view HIV. And this work is very much an attempt to talk about bug chasing and HIV infection from a non-healthcare perspective. And I think just through repetition and the amount of time I've spent, say, learning about HIV from a healthcare perspective, find it hard to step away from that. In terms of what I think about this type of research, I don't want all research to be this, but at the same time, I don't want all research to be just spreadsheet, quantitative stuff either. I think this is pretty useful in getting a sense of what the bug chasing community is, why some people engage in it, and then putting forward a thesis as to why they are doing so. One thing I guess the article is not... Oh, is it not trying to do this? Actually, no, it is trying to do this. It is trying to set forward an explanation for why bug chasing occurs. It's because people are eroticizing HIV. My problem then is that the author actually notes a number of non-erotic explanations for why this is the case, and then just doesn't address them again. He just says, well, it's the eroticization of HIV. I like this explanation for these reasons. Here are some people's interviews that I will slot into my model, and then doesn't really engage with, okay, but what about the non-erotic reasons why people might want to get HIV? And so I think that is a problem. I don't know if it's a problem with this particular research methodology overall, because you actually can address that problem within this paradigm. It's more a problem with this work specifically. Yeah. But I suspect also I just don't have as strong feelings about this, because you wanted to bring up the methodological dimension of it.
Oh, it's interesting. So just on that note, that might just be a matter of scope, just practical scope.
Yeah. It could just be scope. Because this is a short work.
Yeah, and these, from my friends who are in the social sciences, it's pretty resource intensive and time consuming, and they've got to do all this post-interview, data analysis and editing and transcription. If he did this before, really good digital transcription.
There wasn't really. I mean, I guess data analysis if you read over your transcripts of the conversations, but
and he might have done thematic analysis as well, probably would have had to dealt with a university ethics council and stuff, which is just I didn't know ethics could be decided by a committee, but apparently it can be.
But it is. Ethics has been solved.
I did spend a fair bit of time in health related academic research and health education, but with regards to Indigenous health, Aboriginal health in Australia. And so a little bit different from Jack. well, I definitely started off with a very strong biomedical bias when I was younger, but then just a lot of the Indigenous health issues in Australia are not entirely biomedical issues. Even something like what's it called, trachoma, which is like an eye infection for people who don't know. That's prevalent in certain parts of Australia amongst Indigenous communities. There's aspects to that are at least partially explainable and treatable or preventable using non-biomedical ideas and approaches, non-biomedical paradigm. And so I've always kind of like had this sense of, health is not just like the biology of it. So during my undergrad, I had this blip of like, okay, getting just really biomedical. But I've sort of always seen health through also a community lens. Like, what role does the community play in preventive healthcare, or getting basic healthcare to people who need it or whatever. So there's like this social, cultural aspect to it. And then in public health in particular, this is very common, this sort of stuff, because they're looking at like policy or like global health issues or health and development, or in Australia, it's like Indigenous health issues, which are almost never like monofactorial. They're always like influenced by like economic factors, social factors, geographic factors, political factors, and the biomedical part of it is one part in a broader picture of health. I don't mind it. I think there's a role to play for this stuff, especially if it's directed towards like some sort of useful outcome, which I can kind of see this being a useful paper. But I've always been iffy. Like, I don't know if it's just the STEM stuff like you, like my STEM brain turns on.
Yeah.
I just think and I can't get away from, I can try to like engage with it, but I always just have this sense of, I don't know what it is exactly. I'm not sure why. Maybe I just haven't read enough about the methodologies or whatever in social sciences outside of economics. And even there's so many issues in economics. But in particular, I think there's this, it often feels like the opposite of, the opposite of the physical sciences and engineering and stuff, where, I've got like where you create a conjecture and you've got to figure out a discriminating test between that conjecture and, say, like the null hypothesis or the prevailing theory. And so there's a very strong falsification undertone embedded in, and I still think that applies in social sciences, but it feels like a lot of the time when I read a social science paper, as I've probably mentioned on other social science episodes, the person writing the paper has, at the very least, decided on, I suppose, what you can call a framework, like a set of default assumptions that they just take as operating assumptions. You kind of always have to do that to some degree to limit the scope of what you're studying, even in the natural sciences, but in a way that I find kind of unhealthy, like kind of saying like, oh, this is a Marxist analysis of, like urban spaces in a city of Melbourne or something. It's like, if you're going into with a Marxist analysis, you're already thinking, like, you've already kind of decided what the like underlying structure of your theory is going to be. You're already excluding like alternative ways of interpreting the data, and that taking on a lens like that or a framework like that, I just have always felt like it can be unhealthy in the social sciences. And that just makes me always question, like, okay, but what are you bringing into, what is the author bringing into this, which either they've explicitly stated it, which is nice when they do that, so then you don't have to, you're just like, okay, well, I'll just read it through that filter. But if they haven't stated it, but you can feel it in undertones of like the way they're writing about certain things and whatever, yeah, I don't know. It's just always made me feel uneasy. And with this one, it's actually not so bad with this paper. I don't mind. I think this is fine. I wonder what the other ones in the series are like. Yeah, so I just get the sense that, yeah, there's all this stuff in the background, like even the thing that you said about it feels Deleuzian, the way he talks at times, or whatever. Like, yeah, okay, so how much does Deleuze or structuralism or whatever these other things informing the way that this guy has designed and gone about doing this thing and interpreted what's happening? And one, do I have to be really understand Deleuze or structuralism or post-structuralism and so forth to really engage with this properly?
No.
In which case I'm totally like unable to. But also, yeah, just bringing in those concepts or that flavoring without maybe like an appendix that like explains some of that stuff or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I think the paper's actually not too bad.
Audience, I guess.
Yeah. But this paper's not so bad in this regard.
Yeah.
So it's been one of the papers social science papers that we've read where I've actually been like, oh, it's not too bad. He's kind of set up front. This is how I'm thinking about it. This is the issue with using Twitter. He did say other people have non-erotic definitions of it. So, I kind of didn't mind. I thought it was like an honest paper, and it was an interesting look at like a community. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it is. That natural sciences and social sciences thing of unstated assumptions or frameworks is, at least in part, just by nature of what is being studied. So if you're studying some particular phenomenon of quarks, and you're a theoretical physicist, it's pretty clear, actually, or it's more easily clear when things are wrong. So you can just have the brute, well, the equations don't work. That's often a pretty clear sign that things just aren't correct. Something's going wrong. Or you can get more complicated and be dealing with biology. And you could say, oh well, the data simply just don't support what's going on, or what you're stating is going on. Then when you get all the way out to something like psychology and then social sciences, so groups of agents interacting, the complexity is such that having something like the equations just don't work. You don't get that clear invalidation signals. And I'm not saying in physics it's always as simple as the equations don't work, but it's more common that you actually do have very, very clear invalidation signals. Something like social sciences, you rarely get something that clear. So I'm sympathetic, because it's just by virtue of the complexity of what's being studied that you get a lot of fuzziness. And it's hard to avoid. That said,
it's really hard to avoid.
It's not an excuse for sloppy work, and I'm not accusing the author of this paper of that. To be clear, I think he did a good job.
I think he did a good job given the, like probably the difficulty in finding enough people to talk to and all these sorts of stuff.
And he's upfront too about like, well, this is surveying people, talking to them about bug chasing.
And having those.
I'd be interested to see if in later papers he set out, say, to explore the difference between eroticising and non-eroticising bug chasing. But
yeah,
Yeah,
and there wasn't too much like slop, you know. Like sometimes you get the word. There was a little bit of just.
There was definitely word salad in this. I got some good word salad. I can read it.
Yeah. I don't know. I
took
I
word
guess like
salad
your
twice.
set point.
It's definitely
give us some quotes.
definitely in there. Okay, here we go.
It didn't set me off completely as just like, oh, come on, all right, just get through it.
Bug chasing generates new meanings for HIV and for the act of seeking infection. Hammond, Holmes and Mercier 2016 describe bug chasing as generating a re-signification of the interpretive repertoires of HIV. However, these authors also concede that these new mythologies are not really new, but rather that bug chasers poach the metaphors they use from available discourses and re-signify them. For example, bug chasers and barebackers commonly use the term breeding to refer to internal anal ejaculation. This term, argues Robinson, is borrowed from the charmed circle's heterosexual procreative discourses in order to constitute their own understanding of taking another man's load, ejaculate, in brackets. The idea of breeding evidences the processes of poaching and re-signification of metaphors and hints at some of the meanings I discuss in the section, genealogy, masculinity, and empowerment. And it's like, listen, mate, you can just say that the gay community will repurpose certain concepts from the straight community, say concepts referring to reproduction, and recontextualize them and use them in different ways. It's like you don't need the word salad.
Yeah, and there's also a good example of what I was saying before about, are they pulling in concepts that really only somebody with some background in, say, structuralism, for example, and the word in this case was mythologies. You know, this, I'm pretty sure, like I've kind of heard that stuff, the word before used in this context, and I'm pretty sure in that like space of intellectual thought, I think it was Foucault or whoever was really into like mythologies and the role that mythologies played. I know one of those French philosophers. So that particular word probably has is loaded with potentially much more meaning than maybe I'd be picking up on, because I'm not appropriately versed in all of this other sociology or anthropological discourse around this stuff. Word salad plus the stuff I was saying before.
I'm less bothered by that because this isn't academic work. And say you're reading a work, say a published work in computer science, they're not going to be writing it at the level of me. They're going to be writing it assuming that someone is well versed in the subject. So that doesn't bother me as much. Just the assumption that most people reading this will have some familiarity with. Yeah, there's a lot of Deleuze-Guattari and Foucault in this article.
Yeah,
and that's
I don't know. I guess
that doesn't worry me
like
so
health.
much.
It's like health. It's to me. It's not
but
as
I think in the
as...
case of this, I think he did say a few times he's trying to approach HIV from a non-health perspective. Like, this is a sociology of HIV that's trying to approach it from non-health angles.
Yeah.
So I'm less bothered by just assuming a professional audience.
Yeah.
Because
and I guess I don't know.
Sure, we're outliers. I don't think many people who aren't already like into academic bug chasing or whatever are going to be reading this.
Yeah, I guess my concern is still like the series is about health. The larger series of texts.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
And I don't know if like maybe they're all fucking like this, but maybe they're not. And
I get. My guess is they are, but I don't actually know.
If your expectation is like, you know, maybe like potentially a doctor or a health worker, or you know, or like somebody involved with health policy might be interested in reading this, and they don't have all of that, and it's embedded in a series on health, interesting, like the intersection of health and technology and that sort of stuff. And so in this particular instance, I'm not fully convinced that he can get away with just like assuming that his audience is on board with all that stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. And look, at least from doctors I know, the vast majority of them, when they will read sections talking about how HIV needs to be understood in a healthcare context as well, and how say infection with HIV should be understood as forming new communities and new territories. Basically, everyone with a medical education is going to think, yeah, but mate, you're all taking antiretrovirals. Like, whether you like it or not, this is medicalized because you're not dead. And I say that because I also think the same thing when I read parts of this. You can try to approach it from a non-healthcare perspective, and that could be fruitful. But inevitably, if people are alive with HIV long term, it's inescapable that it is medicalized.
I think that's fair enough. I think if I could, I'd say, like, okay, could you pass this, like the interviews like the excerpts that he's chosen from his interviews and his explanatory or his commentary on it. No, his explanation and commentary on it. If you could pass that into, I guess, more accessible, you could, one, reduce it by half, and two, like, make it just more like, oh, okay, this guy's saying, yeah, there's these interesting social phenomena. This is what this community is doing in this house, like if the way they think about it and stuff in much more straightforward, simple terms, without the word salad and without pulling in all this other like background stuff. But having said that, like, I don't think it's the worst of all the social science papers we've read or I've read.
No, the word salad is
not that bad.
you just assume some level of word salad for social science papers.
Yeah.
This one was pretty good. It's also, the interviews themselves don't have the word salad because it is actually guys talking really, about bug chase, like their experiences with bug chasing. So they talk very clearly. They're not using academies. They're just talking about getting pozzed or jacking off to bug chasing porn. It's pretty prosaic. It's more when he comes in to explain to you what you just read, which was phrased in perfectly plain English. It's like, this guy says, I log on to Twitter and I masturbate to bug chasing porn and then I log off and get on with my life. It's like, I don't actually need that to be rephrased in a much less clear way by the author. I get what he's saying.
I get what you're saying. So there's two things on that. Like, sometimes I think with like, Bataille, Baudrillard, who else have we read? Or like when I tried to read Foucault or whatever.
Like, as an aside, like, if you can, because you have read a book of Baudrillard's. Baudrillard is so much less clear than Foucault. Foucault, most of the time, is actually reasonably concrete.
Yeah, but I had the show to motivate me to read it, so...
We'll read the order of things for next week.
But, as I was saying, like, you read something that's simple, I jacked off, then logged off, and, just went about my day. It was just... but then I've noticed that these authors, these other, like, these theorists, and people that I know in real life who have been heavily influenced by such theorists, like, always want to look for too much meaning in this stuff, and they're just overthinking it way too much. It's like, no, maybe he's just like he's just jerking off, and like it's not some indication of, I don't know, some broader social myth, emanating up through some substructure, and I don't know,
he might just like he might stroking his hog to this particular type of porn.
He might just get off on this thing, and that's all it is.
I'm reminded of Freud in one of his moments of post-nut clarity saying, "Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar." It's like, it basically sums up my feelings with respect to this.
So then I had one other comment before my last like little potential like extra discussion is, I think sometimes I do appreciate that he tried to separate it from health. I guess with the caveat that like it's still a health issue. I guess I can appreciate that what he's trying to do is like look at this thing through the lens of not just as a health issue, that this is also a social phenomenon. It interacts with like human sexuality and taboos and online communities and technologies. And I guess to me, it's like if I was to read another paper sort of similar to this and it was a health issue or whatever, if they just kind of stated up front, like, yes, this is obviously a health issue, and the majority of the literature is discussing this in it's about the biomedical aspect of it, or the health impacts of it, or whatever. But in this particular paper, I'm going to be exploring non-health aspects of this issue, and because I'm interested in this other question, like these other questions around this, how people are living with or responding to this, in this case, like a health issue. And a good example of this in a kind of adjacent topic that I'm interested in, or have been interested in the past, is drugs, and all the different types of drugs, psychedelics or whatever, like IV drug use and that sort of stuff. And in that particular instance, like, yeah, there's health risks, say, like with taking psychedelics or whatever, but there's also a really interesting discussion around, like, notwithstanding those health risks or whatnot, that, for example, like, there's cultural aspects of psychedelics, like with some Native American communities, they take peyote in, like, whatever, like, ancient ceremony, and it's really important to them and their religion. And yeah, sure, there's a health risk, but if you were to write a paper about the use of peyote in Native American communities and its significance and the rituals around it and why they do it and so forth, I don't think you'd need to go on and on about the health risks of it or the health aspect of it. And so I guess whether it's this one or other things, like, I guess to me, it's okay to kind of put that aside and say, in the context of this particular paper, we're not really going to be, like, emphasizing the health aspect of it, and we're going to be exploring these other parts of it. As long as they're not kind of flippant about it, I suppose, or completely disregarding it or denying it or something,
Yeah, which he doesn't. I think there's at least one point in the book where he says, yeah, it's the healthcare perspective is important. I'm just going to put it aside for the purposes of this article, which is fair.
I think there's a place for that. I think it's interesting. And I think, like, in the social sciences, these are some of the interesting things that they could talk about, as long as they don't overcook it with all the serious stuff. The last little thing that I want to talk about is just mention around, like, or get your thoughts on this idea of infection as an identity. Like, have you seen this anywhere else? Like, ever heard of, I guess, like, you might think of yourself, if you've had cancer, as a cancer survivor, and if you've, like, survived it, and there's a bit of a cancer survivor community, or, like, if you're actively going through chemo or something, there is.
Certain diseases have it more than others. My first thought is there are a bunch of mental illnesses which are fashionable at the moment.
Yeah.
And, like, I do think, at least among certain people, it's almost a fashion accessory to have, or to claim to have, a particular mental illness. So that's my first thought. I think so there are multiple things to say about this. One is that, so sure, if you really are affected by some particular disease, particularly I think chronic diseases lend themselves better to this than, you broke your arm. That doesn't feel like something that you form an identity around. But chronic diseases, if they make a significant impact on your life, if you meet other people who have similar experiences and understand what it's like, and can empathize with your situation rather than just sympathize or be indifferent. That's
shared experience.
Yeah, that's good, and I think that can be really beneficial to people. They can really like that. But it's probably always been a possibility, but the internet does seem to make it worse, because there's some strange competitiveness that pops up in these disembodied spaces. But people can really double down on their identity of having a disease, or turn the disease from something that they have, but it's not central to their sense of self, into a facet of their identity, and then get competitive about it. So you see this with people with bipolar do it. I've seen with some online communities where they'll compete over who has the most extreme symptoms, and it's almost this badge of honor to have had the biggest manic bender on a particular message board.
Yeah, right.
And then, it seems like TikTok is a hotbed of basically making up mental illnesses and videoing yourselves with your pretend Tourette's or your pretend multiple personalities, so on, so on. So mental illnesses definitely attract people who want to turn a chronic illness into an identity. Then, I guess so. HIV, because of, in at least large part for historical reasons, because of so the sheer terror, by the sound of it, in the gay community during the 80s, early 90s, during the AIDS epidemic and pandemic. There does seem to be that sense of community around having HIV, because it was just its appearance was such a pivotal event in basically the entire, the global gay community. You probably know more about it than I do, but that seems to be, at least in my mind, a pretty good explanation, at least partly why it's prominent there. Why you have people for whom HIV is actually part of their sense of self.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think you've raised a valid point about the fail state of identifying with, I guess, I suppose it could happen with anything. In this case, it's with, medical conditions. I suppose I personally think that identity can be a really unhealthy thing, over identifying with basically anything. I think I see it a lot in my experience of the Australian Aboriginal community. It's almost becomes an overriding part of somebody's personality and the way they interact with people. It's sure, it's important, I guess, in different people's lives, but it becomes almost this focal point when something like whatever it is becomes too much of a focal point, and it sort of prevents you from there's these other parts to what it means to be a person, and you're just sort of, it's almost this compulsive or obsessiveness. And in the gay community, it's if I go to a gay friend's house, and which I don't mind, but in this case, every is dick straws, and it's outrageous. It's all right, I get it, you're gay. We can just hang out. And it's harmless. In some instances it can be harmless, but I often wonder whether it's identifying with HIV status in this case, over identifying with it. Or I 100% agree with you. There's you can have people who identify with or over-identify with mental health things and so forth, having competitions about who's more sick or whatnot. It's unhealthy, and I sometimes think it's that is not what it means to be a person. For myself, the way that I've been sort of thinking through this identity stuff, because it's just been the concept of identity has had a big impact on my 20s, just given that I was at an Australian university as an Indigenous student, and all of that conversation in that space is dominated by identity politics and certain philosophical ideas or schools of philosophy, and it overwhelmingly shaped. I have had to think a lot about this, whereas I don't know if other people have had to think been in a situation where they had to think about this stuff as much. But for me, my solution to some of the identity issues that I was having when I was younger, which I found like distressing at times, was to reduce the weighting of identity in my life as a thing that it like should take up so much headspace or be so important. In fact, I've actually basically gone the opposite direction, which is to say that me personally, I almost feel as though like the thing that matters about me and about everybody I meet is that they're a person. And what I mean by that is they're a creative problem solver, and their mind is capable of all the same things that every other mind is. And it doesn't, all these other things, what body you're in, you know, like they can affect the way that your experience of the world, but those are all those are completely parochial. But like being a person is not parochial. That is the really important thing. And these other factors, like race or mental health status or whatever, that is not what it's about to be a person. Like that is not what being a person is about. And your obsession with it is preventing you, one, from relating to other people, but also two, from actually fully embracing some of the implications of like the fluidity of the human mind to explore different ideas, to like be engaged with, say, different cultural contexts or with other people's experience and stuff. And yeah, I guess identity, I've just like downplayed it completely and de-identified with a lot of stuff. And I guess when I see these people like identifying with infection or like HIV status, to me it's like, whoa, there's something that's gone wrong there. And I don't know what it is, obviously. I can't diagnose that. But to me, that's like the person's mind has some sort of like hang up that's preventing them from properly processing their situation, and it's probably preventing their ability to live a full, rich life, because that kind of over-identification with things often leads to almost like an experiential or intellectual cul-de-sac that people struggle to get out of. So yeah, that's broadly what I think, and I think this is just one instance of that happening in a very strange, a very obscure thing to identify with. But to me, it's just like, oh, okay, it's like this is that thing that people do sometimes.
I guess this case is interesting
in this mode.
To use some of the terminology that I'm sure is beloved by the author, it problematizes identity in that it takes it. So I'd say there are plenty of identities, you know, the people strongly identify with that have,
which are not necessarily failures, like problematic.
So to problematize something is, my understanding is, you take some sort of situation or a concept and remove it from its context, or put it into a different context to make it its workings more obvious or easier to analyze. I guess you can think about it like money. How, sure, you can think about money a lot, but a lot of the time when you're paying for something, you don't. You just do so automatically without considering all of the philosophical implications of money.
Yeah.
But if you recontextualize it, actually, yeah, maybe money is a good example. If you can recontextualize it with something like Bitcoin instead of dollars, so like you're just using dollars, most of the time you don't think about it. You just use them because you're contextually so used to it. But you get something like Bitcoin, which is still money, but you change the concept around it into something new. So once again, you have to confront what is money. You know, what am I actually doing with Bitcoin or with some other new money? So I think in that case, you know, you're problematizing money by putting it into a new context, and in doing so, I think the thinking goes, you can perhaps come across insights that you might not come across as easily just using a more common use of money.
Yeah, okay. And in particular, what I like to sort of quickly read in the introduction to the idea on Wikipedia is like, when you do that context when you transplant it into the new context and strip it of its common sense meaning, you analyze it, your approach to the analysis is you approach it as like a challenge or a problem or whatever. Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. I guess, yeah, I guess to me it seems like there's identities that people are like they're inexplicit ideas. The person maybe isn't that. A really good example of this would be like a person who's grown up in an Aboriginal community has never really spent any time with ever like non-Aboriginal people, and then they go to like get a job or go to university like in a city and all surrounded it, and then all of a sudden like that juxtaposition makes it like really obvious then, and maybe they'll explicitly say, oh, I'm Aboriginal and that's really important, and it's in contrast to like the new context. And almost like sometimes they're identities that are much more like driving parts of the person's like for a better word, like personality or psyche or their mind. Like it's deeply embedded, probably largely inexplicit, and that's probably because like it's been a pervasive part of their situation as they've developed as a person. Ethnicity, culture, that sort of stuff. And then in this particular instance, it's almost like an opt-in identity. It's like, okay, well, it's like a reframing of like, okay, I was HIV negative, now I'm HIV positive, and there's some reframing of that. It's like, oh, well, okay, like, now I'm that thing. I am that thing, and it's like deeply informing now my experience, my interpretation of the world. It's interesting. I'm not an expert in this stuff. I can't say. I guess, yeah, my concern about it is like when it prevents somebody from just like, yeah, being more flexible in their thinking. And if it's, in particular, if it's like they can't, what's the word? Like, well, in the case of like Indigenous people, like I try not to do this, but I think I did it when I was younger, is like over-identifying with, say, like health outcomes in Australia. Like Aboriginal people have like, different statistical differences in health outcomes compared to like non-Indigenous Australians and stuff. And then thinking, oh, well, because I'm Aboriginal, therefore, like I am, predetermined to be unhealthy and die of a heart attack. It's like, no, that's a description of like, this is a statistical description of group, like that can be quantified. It's like, that doesn't, like health is more complex than just, oh, well, I happen to be a member of this group. And it's not explanatory, it's just a pattern. And that can be quantified. And that failure state is essentially like this identification with this thing, with this factor, is like affecting the way that you're actually operating in the world and the way that you like think through your problem situation. Like, okay, I can't actually overcome this thing or whatever. And with HIV infection, I'd be wondering like, as an identity, I'd be wondering like, okay, is that like in the back of your mind, is that coloring the way that you like form communities amongst other gay men or whatever? Or is that like causing you some sort of distress? Or are you like othering yourself from people in an unnecessary way, that sort of stuff? I can't answer any of those questions, but that's just some of the stuff that I'm suspicious of the concept of identity, basically. And yeah, I largely regard it as like potentially, I think there's potential for it to be a trap for people. And yeah, maybe it can be healthy sometimes, but because
I guess you could have some benefits to it. Like,
yeah,
I don't know, in the case of HIV positivity, it's like, okay, just having, because I think some of the people interviewed for this book said, yeah, I basically just have sex with other HIV positive guys, so you just don't have to think about it. Like, don't have to worry about maybe infecting someone. So I guess it can have advantages. I guess the question is then, can you do that without HIV positivity being part of your identity? And I'd say, yeah, probably. Like,
yeah, maybe that's a good thing to just say, I guess like a heuristic, I'm just like shooting from the hip here, but maybe distinguishing between identification with and over-identification or unhealthy identification.
Yeah.
And obviously there can be like really healthy forms of it, like I don't think that it's unhealthy to have like FIFA World Cup stuff, and people identify with their country, and it seems like pretty healthy unless they start like smashing up the stadium or something. Like, for the most part, it's not necessarily an issue, and so I can see there being benefits to in the HIV status case, there being a healthy level of identification with that might inform my experience of the healthcare system or the gay community or whatever. And then, my spidey senses are tingling with regards to, and what's the failure state? There could, so it seems like this. So, just be careful with that one. Like, don't let that become like too much of a mind virus for you. Because my gut instinct is that you're playing with fire there. And that could be, you can end up in a pretty hairy like situations. But yeah, I guess there's a healthy way that you can interact with these things.
Yeah. So
that's all the topics I've got. Do you want to? I thought there was a nice quote that I've just got here from, like the conclusion that I thought I might just read out. Is that?
Yeah, go for it.
And I think it's fair. It kind of puts a, pin in it. There is perhaps. Bug chasing evidences the transformative power of these technologies, such as PrEP and antiretroviral and the internet and stuff. Bug chasing evidences the transformative powers of these technologies for intimate and erotic life. These transformations are far-reaching, from allowing bug chasing to be disengaged from certain death or infection, such as actually progressing to AIDS, to it becoming a subculture of sorts, thanks to the internet allowing these men to find each other under a common label. Understanding the erotic lives of these men and their desires requires understanding how they are contextualized by these technologies, and arguably, or potentially others, and begs for future research to look at their erotic and desiring potential. And I just thought that idea was very, just like, he didn't, I don't know, like, I feel like there's a lot there that you could go in a lot of really interesting directions. But yeah, like, these technologies have contributed to the transformation of, in this case, like a really deep part of being human, our sexual desires and eroticism. And just that idea that, we never intended, the people who created the internet are like, communities can form online. It's like, and some of those communities are going to be bug chasers, and it's like radically changed the way that part of the gay community like interacts with the world. So, it's like, it's been this profound transformation, and it's this clash between the technology, which at the end of the day is kind of just physical phenomena, like manipulating the physical world, with culture and people and our sexuality and our communities and stuff, and we take that technology and become something that like potentially couldn't have existed before. I thought that was just a really interesting way for him to finish up.
The times he touched on technology and desire were really good. I've already said at the start of this episode, but I would recommend this book if people find what we've talked about interesting. And give it a read. It's a paid article. I'm not advocating for this, but you can find it for free if your sense of morality allows that.
And if
it's not long. It's not particularly difficult. So yeah, if you want to learn more about bug chasing, this is a very, very good place to start. What about you? You'd recommend it? I think you recommended it earlier.
Yeah, speed read the parts that are a bit word salady.
Yeah. You don't have to get bogged down in the post-structuralism. You can skim over that. Yeah,
and I just think it's an interesting like social phenomena. It's just really, really weird. It's good that somebody's actually taken it seriously and tried to write about it in a way that's like not flippant, not overly sexual, but also, I think the thing that I appreciate the most about his approach is that he's not trying to demonize them.
No, the opposite.
Yeah, which is I think like, maybe you can have somebody demonizing them or whatever, saying it's whatever. And then maybe he's going too much in the other direction. I don't know, like not demonizing them enough or whatever. But somewhere between the two is probably reasonable, but like probably to get the insight into things like this, like strange social phenomena like this, you need to talk candidly with the people in the particular subculture or whatever, or, you know, read their forums and stuff. But I think like that humanizing, like, I guess, yeah, like humanizing the participants of your study, if it's with regards to something that's a taboo, that they're almost certainly going to be treated with suspicion or whatever outside of that. I think that is really respectable, and I think he did a fairly good job of it. So I'd recommend it if you're interested in stuff. I feel like I learned something.
Yeah, we initially picked this topic because we thought it'd be sort of goofy in a very funny, dark way. But yeah, this was a lot more gratifying than just pointing at bug chasing forums and saying, "Oh, isn't that weird?"
Yeah, it was actually fruitful, like a fruitful thing to read, a fruitful discussion to have with you, rather than just like pointing at it and laughing. Like, yeah, like
you're just getting blasted with gay porn, which is again what most of these online communities are.
Having said what we just said, I don't get me wrong. I think our bone smashing episode or whatever, like other episodes are like, for example, bone smashing, it's still fun to just point out, like, look at this funny thing on the internet. But it would be kind of interesting for somebody to go out and earnestly interview like bone smashers and understand like how they ended up like that. What are they trying to achieve? Why do they do that? Why do they think this is a good approach? And how they use technology to facilitate like that.
Jaime García-Iglesias, we have got a research proposal for you if you're listening.
Yeah. I still reserve the right to find stuff on the internet, point at and laugh, but this was a refreshing find instead of doing that.
The thing is, if there's something very odd going on, oftentimes there's going to be some reason behind it. Like, people don't just do things. There'll be even if it's just, you know, a post hoc rationalization for the tempests of the unconscious. There'll be some sort of justification for it, as we found in this article.
Yeah. So last things for the episode are just like. Yeah, so we did recommendations. Do we think the author solved their problem situation?
Sort of hard to say. I think, look, there's a bit more light shed on bug chasers now, you know, with this article having been written and published than there was before. I'm unconvinced that bug chasing is simply the eroticization of HIV. I think there's more to it than that. So in that sense, no. But say from a purely exploratory perspective, sure, this has gone some way to solving the problem of not having enough information on bug chasers.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they solved it, but I think it was still fruitful, and it was definitely thought-provoking with regards to the role of technology in this stuff. So we've got shout-outs. Do you have any other? No, we did shout-outs at the top of the episode now. I guess we're
Thanks
done.
everyone
Thanks for listening. Yeah, just a reminder: join the Discord, support us on Patreon, and so forth. And our next episode is drones warfare.
Oh, is that the queer drone warfare?
Queer drone warfare. So
okay, we've got a double one of those
LGBTI thing. Yeah. All right, nice. So stay excited for that. Hopefully that one will be a lot more frivolous than this one.
Hopefully that'll be sillier, but I don't know. The premise of it is so odd that I can see myself really enjoying it. I don't know. It's a wild card.
Yeah, let's see. I'm looking forward to it. All right, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.